Into the Forbidden, The Secret Initiations of Alexandra David-Neel. Episode 1. The Unseen Path. Alexandra David-Neel stood on the deck of the steamship that chugged slowly away from the coast of Europe. The year was 1916, and war raged across the continent. Smoke from the vessel's funnel trailed into a sky tinged with a somber grey, as though the world itself reflected the cataclysm of nations. Alexandra, tall, poised, 40-something, gripped the railing with cold-gloved hands. She was leaving behind all that was familiar and stepping into the unknown. It was a scene she had reenacted many times in her life as a traveller and seeker, but never with so much at stake. Born in Saint-Mandé in France, she had embraced a life of exploration, both geographical and spiritual. She had learned Sanskrit in her youth, studied Buddhist texts, and even taken the vows of a lay Buddhist. Now, with Europe convulsed in conflict, she was drawn more than ever to the east, specifically to the vast mountainous land of Tibet, known as the Forbidden Kingdom to foreigners. It was a place few Europeans dared to tread, and even fewer women. Yet Alexandra was determined to do more than visit. She aimed to penetrate its secrets, especially its esoteric teachings. With her on the ship was her adopted son and companion, the young Lama Afa Yongden. He was a Tibetan from a region on the border with China, and he had already been a faithful companion on her earlier travels. Lean, with an alert gaze and a quiet humor, Yongden was at once her disciple and her teacher. His knowledge of Tibetan customs and language, combined with Alexandra's unyielding curiosity, made them an unlikely but formidable pair. She ventured to the stern to get away from the bustle of the other travelers. War had forced many people onto ships bound for safer lands, but Alexandra had no illusions about safety. Ahead lay hardships more daunting than ocean storms or border checkpoints. Yet she also believed that in those hardships she would uncover a deeper knowledge that made every risk worthwhile. Over the course of weeks, the ship ploughed on across the sea, reaching the Indian subcontinent by early autumn. India's broad and sun-baked land unfurled before her eyes, a riot of colour and sound. She tasted the swirl of incense from temple courtyards, heard the chant of mantras in languages ancient and divine. Even in the busy ports and markets, she was overcome by a sense of stepping closer to the hidden vistas of Tibet. Everywhere she went, she asked travellers and monks, "Have you any news of the roads into Tibet? Is it possible to venture deeper into the Himalayas?" Many shook their heads. "Those roads are closed to foreigners, madam, especially women. The Tibetan government does not allow outsiders to enter easily." But Alexandra refused to be daunted. She had faced border closings and bureaucratic walls before. She resolved to approach from the northern side or through the eastern passes if necessary. For now, she would move carefully, gathering knowledge, texts, and making important connections. During her stay in the plains of India, she met with various monks and scholars who marveled at her fluency in Sanskrit, her facility with Tibetan prayer, and her fierce desire to learn. It was there, in dusty reading rooms lit by dim oil lamps, that she pored over scriptures related to the Vajrayana traditions of Buddhism, the very teachings that thrived in Tibet. Each page was a key hint, a step on the path of the esoteric mysteries she longed to witness firsthand. One day, in the corner of a cramped library in Calcutta, she was introduced to an Indian scholar who had travelled in Tibet decades earlier. His hair was grey, and the wrinkles around his eyes spoke of nights spent reading ancient palm leaf manuscripts. He peered at Alexandra with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "I hear you wish to go where few foreigners have set foot," he said softly, in a mixture of English and Hindi. "You do realize the danger?" "I do," Alexandra replied. Her voice was gentle, but it carried her trademark resolve. "Danger is not my concern. My purpose is to learn. And to learn, I must see and experience for myself." He nodded slowly. "Then you must find a teacher on the other side, if you can. A lama who can instruct you in the rites you seek. But be warned, the secrets of Tibetan Buddhism, especially the more esoteric teachings, are guarded fiercely. They are not doled out to the merely curious. She offered him a polite smile. I do not take this lightly. I have studied, practiced, and prayed for years. My heart is set on learning the truth behind these practices, not on misusing them. With a sigh, the scholar rummaged in a pile of old notes, retrieving a small slip of paper. He hesitated, then handed it to her. This is the name of a teacher who once instructed me in the basics of tummo, what you might call the yoga of inner heat. He resides in a monastery near the Sino-Tibetan border. Perhaps he still teaches there. But tread carefully, Madame David-Neel. Not all in Tibet welcome a foreign presence. She bowed with sincerity. Thank you. I shall remember your counsel. From Calcutta, she and Yongden ventured northward by train, then by caravan, winding through mountain passes. The war in Europe seemed remote now, replaced by the immensity of the Himalayas. Alexandra had read everything she could about these rugged paths, how travelers sometimes succumbed to altitude sickness, how storms could trap them for days, how bandits roamed certain routes. Every so often, she encountered lonely British or Indian outposts where officers and bureaucrats stared at her with a mixture of bemusement and incredulity. But their amusements meant little to her. She was fueled by a higher purpose. During a stay in Darjeeling, she acquired what she called her Tibetan kit. Warm clothes, boots suitable for mountain treks, a few provisions that she suspected would be scarce at higher elevations, and the paraphernalia for Buddhist practice, mala beads, a small bell and dorje, and the texts she cherished. She also had to secure a plausible cover story. Though she had traveled in Asia before, there was no guarantee that Tibetan authorities would look kindly upon a European woman crossing the border. Yongden suggested a bold idea: disguise. We can dress you as a Tibetan pilgrim or mendicant. If your speech in Tibetan is fluent enough, perhaps it will be enough to fool the border patrols. Alexandra raised her eyebrows. You think I can pass for a Tibetan? She smiled, half in jest. I may have studied your language, but I doubt I look the part. You have learned to pronounce the words quite well, Yongden said. And if you keep your face partly covered in the manner of traveling pilgrims, if we travel at dusk or dawn, it might be possible. They began practicing daily. Alexandra worked on perfecting not only the words, but the accent, the tone, the gestures. She learned how Tibetan pilgrims carried their belongings, how they performed prostrations along certain holy paths, how they spoke to lamas, how they negotiated for lodging in remote villages. She and Yongden created a repertoire of stories to tell if they were questioned. Over and over, they rehearsed. In time, they left Darjeeling and ventured further up the mountain roads. The approach to Tibet was an arduous ascent, with hair-raising turns along steep cliffs. Snow-capped peaks loomed in the distance, silent witnesses to the traveller's determination. One late afternoon, with the sun dipping below the horizon, they reached a border region. A small Tibetan patrol stepped out from behind a boulder. Clad in thick woolen robes and carrying old rifles, they scanned the travelers suspiciously. "Halt!" barked the patrol leader in Tibetan. "Who are you, and what is your business?" Yongden stepped forward, bowing slightly. "We are humble pilgrims," he said in a respectful tone. "We come from afar to seek the blessings of the sacred monasteries. Please, brother, let us pass." Alexandra kept her face lowered. She clutched a small prayer wheel and murmured a mantra. The patrol leader narrowed his eyes, trying to get a better look at the foreign pilgrims. But with the light fading, and with Alexandra's posture hunched, her face hidden, the officer eventually gave a gruff nod. "Very well," he said, "but these are uneasy times. Do not wander off the main path." They pressed on, heartbeats pounding with relief. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and Alexandra felt the first sting of altitude. Her breath came in short gasps, and her head felt light. Yet she also sensed a deep exhilaration. At last, she was entering the land that had beckoned her for so many years. A small village offered them lodging in a simple guest house. The walls were thick earthen structures built to retain heat. The wind howled outside. Villagers chanted and prayed before a shrine dedicated to local protective deities. The next morning, Alexandra rose early to see the sun cast its first rays over the Himalayan ridges. Prayer flags fluttered in the biting wind, carrying mantras into the endless sky. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt a powerful certainty stirring within her. For years she had studied these rituals from books. Now she was at last among the people for whom they were a living tradition. She recalled lines from a Tibetan prayer about the pursuit of enlightenment. May I cross the ocean of samsara and guide all beings to liberation. Standing at the threshold of this forbidden land, she asked herself if she would be worthy to learn, to receive, and to share the wisdom she sought. Looking down at her traveling companion, she smiled. "Thank you, Yongden," she whispered. "We've taken the first step. Now the real journey begins." He returned the smile. "It does indeed. Are you prepared for what lies ahead?" She gazed at the icy peaks in the distance. "I believe so," she said softly. "I have never been more certain of my path." They finished their sparse breakfast, a bit of yak butter tea and sampa, the roasted barley flour so common in Tibetan cuisine, and pushed further toward the monastery that the Indian scholar had mentioned. Her heart quivered with anticipation. She hoped the Lama there would agree to teach her. She was a foreigner, a woman in a region that had historically been closed to outsiders, but she carried with her more than just physical supplies. She brought knowledge of Buddhist doctrine, the humility to learn, and a resolute spirit that had already overcome so many obstacles in her life. The trek to the monastery took days. At night, they slept in caves or small village huts. The path twisted and turned through valleys scoured by icy winds. Occasionally, they passed other Tibetan pilgrims who greeted them with prayers of blessing and questions about their destination. Alexandra and Yongden responded in carefully rehearsed Tibetan. Despite her discomfort, her feet ached from the rough paths, her body felt battered by cold. Alexandra found a sublime beauty in this land. She would note in her diaries how the silence of the mountains was broken only by the whisper of the wind and the chanting of distant prayers. Every step brought her closer, not just to a physical destination, but to a spiritual unveiling. Finally, they arrived at a small monastery perched on a rocky ledge, accessible only by a narrow trail. Colorful prayer flags stretched between stone buildings, fluttering against the backdrop of a vast sky. A few novice monks spotted the arriving pilgrims and hurried to inform their superiors. At the main gate, an older monk greeted them with courteous but reserved words. "Welcome, travelers. May you find refuge here." He inspected them closely. "What brings you to this remote place?" Yongden bowed and spoke. "Venerable monk, we seek an audience with the teacher who is said to reside here, the one known for his knowledge of Tummo and other esoteric practices. Could we humbly request his audience?" The monk's eyes flickered with curiosity and caution. "That depends on who you are. These practices are not for the idle or the unprepared." Alexandra lowered her hood slightly, carefully revealing her face. Her accent in Tibetan was not perfect, but she had practiced for this moment. "Venerable friend, I have journeyed far, from India, and before that from lands even farther away. I have studied the Dharma for many years. My request is sincere. If your teacher deems me unworthy, I will depart without complaint, but I beg an opportunity to meet him." For a moment, the monk said nothing. Then he bowed. "Wait here, please." He disappeared into the complex, leaving Alexandra and Yongden in the chilly courtyard. The monastery's walls were decorated with depictions of bodhisattvas, fierce protector deities, and scenes from the life of the Buddha. The crisp air carried the aroma of incense and butter lamps. Alexandra noticed the novices glancing curiously from behind doorways, perhaps intrigued by the presence of an unfamiliar woman in their midst. After some time, the monk returned. "The Lama will see you," he said. "Follow me." They were led through a series of corridors and small courtyards, each lined with prayer wheels that squeaked as novices turned them. Chanting resonated from a distant hall where a group of monks recited scriptures in low, resonant tones. Finally, they reached a simple chamber lit by a single butter lamp. Sitting cross-legged on a cushion was a thin man in his 60s, his face kind but alert, his gaze piercing. He wore the red and saffron robes, typical of Tibetan lamas. Alexandra and Yongden prostrated themselves in the Tibetan manner, touching their foreheads to the ground 3 times. Then they remained kneeling, eyes lowered, hands folded. The Lama spoke in a clear voice, "Rise, child of the Dharma." They obeyed. He regarded Alexandra for a long moment, as though weighing her spirit. "You have come a long way, I hear." "I have, Lama," she replied quietly. "I have studied the teachings in India, but I wish to delve deeper, to learn the secret practices of Tibetan Buddhism. I have read of Tummo, of advanced yogic techniques, and I long to understand them." He held her gaze. "And why would you seek these teachings? Many come seeking powers or marvels without understanding the responsibility they entail." Her voice did not waver. "I seek the truth that underpins them, Lama. I believe that through these practices, I can deepen my understanding of the Dharma and my connection to the universal consciousness that the Buddha taught." He nodded slowly, then turned to Yongden. "And you, young one, you travel with her willingly?" Yongden bowed his head. "Yes, Lama. I have seen her devotion and sincerity." Another pause. Then the Lama motioned for them to sit on cushions before him. "I will speak with you further, and we will see where this leads." Alexandra felt relief flood through her. She had not been turned away outright. Perhaps she would indeed have the chance to learn from a genuine master. The next days would be a test of her resolve, her adaptability, and her respect for the traditions she sought to enter. Little did she know that this was merely the first gate through which she must pass. In the days to come, she would discover that the path of Tibetan esoteric practice was winding and steep, much like the roads she had traveled to reach this hidden place. She cast her eyes toward the butter lamp on the altar, its flame dancing in the still air, and prayed inwardly that she might be guided by wisdom and compassion. The secret teachings she had read about, telepathy, levitation, inner heat, and illusions, were not mere curiosities. They were signposts on the path to enlightenment, or so the texts claimed. Now she would find out if that was true. And so began her introduction to the deeper currents of Tibetan Buddhism, a journey that would push her body and mind to their limits, reshape her understanding of reality, and eventually lead her into the very heart of forbidden Tibet. Episode 2. Doors of the Hermitage. Morning arrived at the monastery in a chorus of chanting. The novices rose before dawn, lit butter lamps, and recited prayers that reverberated through the corridors. Alexandra joined them in the main hall, kneeling on a woven mat beside Yongden. The flickering lights illuminated thankas, elaborate silk scrolls depicting Buddhas and bodhisattvas hung on the walls. The centuries-old floor creaked underfoot, a testament to the history embedded in these sacred halls. The Lama who had received them was named Tsering Dorje. Over the following days, Alexandra learned that he was known for his mastery of Tummo, the inner heat practice. But he did not share that skill lightly. Instead, he tested her devotion in subtle ways, assigning her to help novices with chores, to join extended prayer sessions, to read aloud from certain scriptures in Tibetan. At times, she sensed him quietly observing her from a distance, gauging her sincerity, her resilience. One cold evening, after the novices had retired to their simple cots, Tsering Dorje summoned Alexandra and Yongden to his private chamber. The air was pungent with juniper incense. Tsering Dorje sat on a cushion, a single butter lamp illuminating his wrinkled but serene features. "I have watched you," he began in a measured tone, "and I see that your intentions are genuine. But I must also warn you, the practices you seek can be dangerous, both physically and mentally. They require discipline beyond what you might imagine." Alexandra bowed her head. "I understand. I am ready to face whatever is necessary." "Are you truly?" Tsering Dorje asked, his gaze penetrating. "This is not a mere matter of sitting in meditation. Tummo, for instance, demands you challenge your very perception of cold, heat, and energy. Students have been known to lose their way if their minds are not stable. Alexandra inhaled slowly. I will not pretend to know all that lies ahead, but I have yearned for this knowledge most of my life. I beg you, Lama, to give me the opportunity. Yongden added in a respectful voice. I stand ready to assist her and learn alongside her, Venerable Lama. Tsering Dorje's expression softened. Very well, but you must first undergo preliminary training, foundational meditations, daily rituals, and the proper recitation of mantras associated with the Vajrayana teachings. Only then might you be initiated into the deeper techniques. We will begin tomorrow. Over the subsequent weeks, Alexandra's life at the monastery took on a rigorous pattern. Before dawn, she joined the monks in chanting the Heart Sutra and other key scriptures. She then performed tasks around the monastery, helping to fetch water from a frozen stream, cleaning the courtyard, or helping in the small kitchen. In the afternoons, she studied with Tsering Dorje, who explained the intricacies of certain mantras and visualizations. She wrote daily in her journal, noting every detail. She recorded the shape of the mountains under changing light, the hushed quality of the air, and the unspoken lessons she gleaned from living among Tibetan monastics. She paid special attention to any references to Tummo or other esoteric practices, collecting them in her notes for deeper reflection. One day, as a snowstorm raged outside, Tsering Dorje led her and Yongden to a remote hermitage tucked behind a rocky outcropping. The path up was treacherous. They nearly slipped multiple times on icy rocks. But once they arrived, Alexandra discovered a small but sturdy structure built into the mountainside. A single window offered a view of the snowy expanse below. Inside, it was surprisingly warm, heated by a simple stove. This, Tsering Dorje announced, is a hermitage where practitioners come to deepen their meditation without distraction. You will each take turns spending nights here. It is part of your training in solitude. Alexandra entered the hermitage, immediately feeling a sense of both awe and apprehension. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind that howled outside the stone walls. A thin straw mat was laid out in one corner, next to a low table bearing a few texts and a butter lamp. Tsering Dorje placed a hand on her shoulder. Focus on your breathing and the energy channels in your body. Maintain your recitations and visualizations. If fear or doubt arises, face it directly with mindfulness. Remember that the essence of these practices is not about display, but about transforming one's inner reality. Alexandra spent her first night in the hermitage battling the howl of the wind and the ache in her legs from prolonged sitting. She recited mantras, tried to visualize the luminous forms of bodhisattvas, and practiced the breathing techniques Tsering Dorje had outlined. Hours passed like centuries. Her mind churned with memories, worries, plans. Several times she caught herself drifting into restless daydreams. And yet, near dawn, something shifted. In a moment of stillness between gusts of wind, she felt a subtle warmth in her abdomen, as if a tiny spark had ignited there. She focused her mind on that warmth, gently nurturing it. She recalled the instructions. See the body's channels and subtle energies. Direct the breath and awareness to stoke the inner flame. The warmth grew slightly, spreading through her limbs. By morning, she emerged from the hermitage, exhausted but elated. She had touched, however briefly, the threshold of Tummo. Returning to the monastery, she recounted her experience to Tsering Dorje, who listened with an enigmatic smile. You have glimpsed a small part of the practice, but be cautious. Illusions can arise, and self-deception is easy. Continue the discipline. Day by day, Alexandra's training deepened. Yongden, too, was receiving teachings, though Tsering Dorje tailored them differently for him, given his native familiarity with Tibetan Buddhism. Alexandra's language skills improved as she conversed with the monks and read Tibetan texts. Her journal entries became more detailed. She noted how Tsering Dorje explained the correlation between breath, mind, and the subtle channels known as nadi. She recorded how certain visualizations involved fiery energy rising from the base of the spine, purifying obstacles in its path. One afternoon, while Alexandra was sweeping the courtyard, a visiting pilgrim approached. He wore a ragged coat, held a prayer wheel in one hand, and carried a large cloth bag slung over his shoulder. His face was tanned and lined, reflecting years of exposure to the harsh Himalayan conditions. When he spoke, his voice was rough but tinged with reverence. "You are the foreign lady?" he asked in Tibetan, eyes wide with curiosity. "They say you study our practices. Are you not afraid that the guardians of these secrets will punish you?" Alexandra paused, gripping the broom. "I do not seek to steal secrets. I only wish to learn what might benefit my understanding of the Dharma." The pilgrim nodded thoughtfully. "That is good. Our land is difficult, our teachings not easily given. But if your heart is pure, may the Dharma flourish." She thanked him and watched as he meandered away, chanting softly under his breath. Such encounters underscored the precarious line she walked. She was a foreigner, and suspicion naturally arose among some who heard of her presence. Yet many others, especially those open-minded monks and pilgrims, recognized her sincere devotion. As winter grew harsher, Alexandra increased her time in the hermitage, practicing tumo under Tsering Dorje's guidance. She braved the biting cold, sometimes wearing only a single layer of clothing to test her growing ability to generate inner heat. There were nights when she shook with cold, her teeth chattering, her body screaming to give up. But she persevered, recalling her vow to learn and experience the truth behind these remarkable yogic feats. Then came the night that changed her training forever. Tsering Dorje called her to the main assembly hall after dusk. Monks had lit hundreds of butter lamps, their flames dancing like golden petals in the darkness. Incense smoke drifted upward, creating ghostly patterns in the flickering light. The chanting was solemn, resonating from the depths of centuries of practice. Alexandra and Yongden stood before Tsering Dorje, who held a small silver bowl filled with water. Next to it lay a special text wrapped in ornate cloth. A row of senior monks stood behind him, silent witnesses to what was about to transpire. "Alexandra," Tsering Dorje said, addressing her by her Western name for the first time in weeks, "you have shown diligence and sincerity in your preliminary training. Tonight, we invite you to receive a formal initiation, an empowerment that will connect you with the lineage of the practice. You must vow to honor these teachings and not to misuse them." She knelt down, touched her forehead to the floor. "I vow," she said in a trembling voice. She sensed a deep gravity in the room. This was not a mere ritual for show, it was a profound spiritual contract. Tsering Dorje recited prayers in Tibetan, Sanskrit, and an esoteric language of mantras. The senior monks joined in. The chanting filled her ears, vibrated through her bones. She felt the presence of something vast, an ancient lineage carried through teacher to student over countless generations. She trembled, awed and humbled. Then Tsering Dorje dipped his finger in the silver bowl and placed droplets of water on her head. "By the blessings of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, by the power of the lineage masters, and by your own dedication, you are now admitted into the practice of Tummo. May this be for the benefit of all sentient beings." He placed a small string of mala beads around her neck, dark beads carved from wood. She looked up, eyes filled with tears of gratitude. When the ceremony ended, the monks filed out quietly, leaving Alexandra, Yongden, and Tsering Dorje alone by the butter lamps. Tsering Dorje smiled gently. "Now the real work begins. The empowerment is only the opening of the door. You must walk the path with unwavering commitment." She bowed low. "Thank you, Lama. I will do my utmost to be worthy." Her nights in the hermitage became even more intense after the initiation. She felt a clearer sense of energy coursing through her body as she practiced the Tummo meditations. She visualized a central channel, flanked by two side channels, with energy swirling at certain points. Over time, she learned to direct her breath so as to heat these channels, focusing on a flame at her navel that expanded outward. During these meditations, she became enveloped in a gentle warmth enough to mitigate the icy Himalayan winds that seeped through the hermitage walls. Yet not all was smooth. Doubts arose, old habits of skepticism crept in. The ghosts of her Western rational mind sometimes mocked her. Are you really generating heat, or is it just your imagination? What if you succumb to illusions and discover nothing real at all? Such doubts gnawed at her, but she continued. She recalled the words of Tsering Dorje. If fear or doubt arises, face it directly with mindfulness. And so she did, letting the doubts come and go like clouds passing across a vast sky. Meanwhile, the political and cultural context of Tibet loomed. She heard rumors of border conflicts, of British and Chinese tensions, of a Tibetan government wary of foreign influence. Monks whispered about how Lhasa remained firmly off-limits to outsiders, especially foreigners, especially a Western woman. But those rumblings only fueled her determination. If she was to truly understand Tibetan spirituality, she hoped one day to visit the sacred city of Lhasa itself. She shared these dreams with Yongden late one night as they both sat before the warm glow of a small fire in the monastery's courtyard. Can we really reach Lhasa? She asked, her voice hushed. The entire region is closed. Yongden gazed at the sparks that danced upward into the star-studded sky. It will be dangerous, but you have already shown that you can survive in this land. Besides, many pilgrims go to Lhasa disguised as mendicants. Perhaps we can do the same. Alexandra's eyes shone with excitement and apprehension. First, we must continue our training here. But one day, yes, I must see Lhasa with my own eyes, if at all possible. They fell silent, each immersed in their own thoughts. The monastery bell tolled softly, signaling the midnight hour. Alexandra realized then that the path to Lhasa, both literally and metaphorically, would be as steep as the climb that had brought her to this place. She had only begun to scratch the surface of Tibetan esoteric knowledge. More initiations, more challenges, and more hidden wonders awaited her. In her diary, she wrote a simple line before falling asleep. I stand at the doors of the hermitage, peering into depths I can scarcely fathom. May I walk this path with courage and humility. Though she could not know it fully then, that combination of courage and humility would be tested in ways that would leave an indelible mark on her life, and on the very pages of Tibetan history she sought to understand. Episode 3. Whispers of Power. Time unfurled in a series of lessons and meditative retreats. Each dawn the monks chanted, and Alexandra joined in, focusing her mind on the vow she had taken. She marveled at how the rigors of daily life, hauling water, sweeping floors, braving the cold, somehow became part of her spiritual discipline. Slowly, her comprehension of Tibetan esoteric concepts expanded beyond academic curiosity into experiential understanding. One crisp morning, Tsering Dorje introduced her to a new teacher who specialized in other secret practices: illusions, telepathy, and the creation of what the texts referred to as thought forms, or tulpas. His name was Lama Wangdu, and he resided in a small hermitage further up the mountain from the monastery. Tsering Dorje escorted Alexandra and Yongden to meet him, hiking through snow-laden trails with a sure-footedness that belied his age. Wangdu's hermitage was a single-room stone dwelling perched at a dizzying height, commanding a view of jagged peaks and endless valleys. The interior was Spartan: a simple altar, a prayer wheel, and a tiny stove. Yet the moment Alexandra stepped inside, she sensed a powerful presence. Wangdu was in his 50s, shaved head, skin roughened by the elements, eyes that sparkled with quiet mirth. He bade them sit on yak hair cushions, then offered salted butter tea. So, you wish to know of illusions and tulpas? He asked Alexandra, his Tibetan words marked by the dialect of a remote region. She nodded, heart pounding. I've read references to them in texts, but they are rarely explained in detail. Is it true a practitioner can create a projected figure through the power of concentrated thought? Wangdu chuckled lightly. It's more subtle than that, my friend. You Westerners often look for the spectacular, but what we call a tulpa is an emanation of mind, a conjuring that can appear almost real, but is in truth no more than a crystallization of thought. Properly done, it can serve various purposes, as a form of protection, a means to practice compassion, or even a test of one's concentration. However, it must be approached with immense caution. Alexandra leaned forward. Why caution? Because once a tulpa gains a certain coherence, it can develop a semblance of autonomy. In untrained hands, it may become difficult to control. That's why knowledge of this practice is often guarded, lest novices dabble irresponsibly. She took a moment to absorb the gravity of his words. I see. Then perhaps I should ask if I am ready. Wang Du studied her a moment. You have undergone initiation under Tsering Dorje. You have begun Tomo. Such training in focusing the mind is an essential foundation. But your mind must be stable as a mountain. Tell me, when you meditate, do you sometimes see fleeting visions? Yes, Alexandra admitted. Often, they are just random shapes or images. Sometimes they vanish as soon as I notice them. That is the flickering mind at play, Wang Du said, softly. To create a tulpa, you would need to harness that flickering, intensify it, shape it consciously, all while maintaining awareness that it is a fabrication. You cannot become lost in it. Yongden, who had been silent thus far, asked, Lama, do these illusions serve a spiritual purpose, or are they merely feats of magic? Wang Du smiled approvingly at the question. They can serve many purposes. In the hands of a bodhisattva, illusions can manifest to teach others or protect them. In the hands of someone less pure, they can become dangerous. Always remember, these are tools, not final truths. The ultimate wisdom is recognizing the emptiness and interdependence of all phenomena. Alexandra felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had come in search of the hidden wonders described in the Tibetan traditions. Now she stood on the threshold of some of the most elusive practices. She sensed that, like Tummo, these teachings demanded not only discipline, but moral clarity. She would proceed carefully. Over the next few weeks, Alexandra split her time between Tsering Dorji's guidance on Tummo and Wang Du's instructions on the mental practices that shaped illusions. Each session with Wang Du involved intense visualization exercises. She was instructed to visualize a specific form, a small figure, perhaps a protector deity or a companion, and imbue it with life through the power of sustained imagination. She was also told to remain grounded in the knowledge that this entity was an illusion. At first, she struggled. Her concentration would waver, and the figure would dissolve into the swirl of her own thoughts. Then, as she gained more control, fleeting glimpses of a shape or presence emerged in her mind's eye. The process reminded her of a child focusing intently on an imaginary friend, except now it was informed by precise Buddhist techniques of concentration and energy manipulation. Meanwhile, rumors swirled around the monastery that a group of pilgrims had passed through on their way to Lhasa. They spoke of increased vigilance by Tibetan border officials and the presence of foreign agents, British, Chinese, perhaps others, lurking at the fringes. Alexandra listened to these rumors anxiously. Would her own path to Lhasa be cut off before she even attempted the journey? One evening, as she left Wang Du's hermitage, she paused at a ledge overlooking the valley. The sky was alight with stars. It was the kind of clear cold that made the air feel razor-sharp. She closed her eyes, practicing the tummo breath, and felt a wave of warmth spread through her torso. Opening her eyes, she gazed at the vastness of the night. She thought of the illusions, the tulpas, the manifold powers the Tibetans spoke of. How small she felt in this immense cosmos. Yet within her was a spark, an awareness that, with perseverance, might expand into greater understanding. She prayed quietly. May my pursuit of these secrets not be driven by ego, but by a desire to uncover the truth. Life at the monastery continued much the same, day after day, until a small crisis jolted them. One of the novice monks fell seriously ill with a fever. The monastery had limited medicinal supplies, and Tsering Dorje was visibly worried about the young man's condition. Alexandra volunteered to help, drawing on the minimal medical knowledge she had gathered in her travels. As she sat with the delirious novice, cooling his forehead with wet cloths, she witnessed Tsering Dorje performing a healing ritual. The Lama chanted specific mantras while visualizing streams of healing light entering the monk's body. She did not know if it had a direct effect, but she felt something shift in the atmosphere, a sense of calm enveloping the boy's fitful tossing. Late that night, when the fever finally broke, Tsering Dorje found Alexandra in the corridor. "Thank you for helping," he said quietly. "In such times, compassion is the greatest practice, more than illusions or even advanced yogic heat." She looked at him, surprised at the earnestness in his voice. "I only did what anyone would do." He shook his head. "Not everyone would. Compassion is not a given, even among practitioners of these arts. I admire your willingness to serve." She blushed, uncertain how to respond, but deeply touched by his words. In her time at the monastery, she had grown to revere Tsering Dorje not only as a teacher, but also as a fatherly figure. He guided her with a firm but caring hand, ensuring she stayed balanced between ambition and humility. A few days later, Wang Du announced that Alexandra's initial practice with illusions had progressed enough to attempt a short demonstration. He led her to a secluded area behind a small ridge, away from prying eyes. The winter sun glinted off patches of ice, but the wind was still. Yongden accompanied them, brimming with curiosity. "Close your eyes," Wang Du instructed Alexandra, "and invoke the visualization we have been practicing. Focus on the figure, its shape, features, the aura that surrounds it. Take your time." She inhaled deeply and shut her eyes. She pictured a small, flickering form, a kind of guardian figure she had seen in Thangka paintings, a protector with a fierce expression but benevolent eyes. She imagined every detail: the swirling garments, the luminous sphere behind its head, the stance that exuded compassionate strength. "Now, let that form appear just a few feet in front of you, as though it stands on the ground," Wang Du said softly. Alexandra felt a rush of energy. She heard nothing but her own breath. The cold air pressed against her, but she tried to channel the tummo warmth to steady her nerves. In her mind's eye, the figure solidified, shimmering faintly. "Open your eyes," Wang Du said. She did. At first, she saw only empty air, but with unwavering concentration, she tried to superimpose the mental image onto her field of vision. A faint glimmer took shape, so subtle that it could have been a trick of the light. Yet there it was, fleetingly. Her heart thundered. She struggled to maintain the visualization, but it flickered in and out of existence. "Good," Wang Du murmured. "That is enough for today. Do not strain yourself." Yongden stood nearby, uncertain. "I saw nothing, but I felt a strange presence," he remarked. Alexandra smiled wryly. "I'm not sure if I created anything real, or if I'm just fooling myself." "That is why we practice," Wang Du said kindly. "Distinguishing genuine insight from mere hallucination requires training and a pure heart. Continue to refine your concentration." As the days stretched into weeks, Alexandra alternated between these advanced practices and the more common rhythms of monastic life. She realized that Tibetan Buddhism was not monolithic. Each teacher had unique methods. Each hermitage had its own emphasis. While Tsering Dorje focused on the tummo and the generation of inner heat, Wang Du guided her in illusions and mental emanations. Other monks shared with her the intricacies of Tibetan liturgical chant, the reading of cryptic scriptures, or the art of making butter sculptures for rituals. All the while, she remained acutely aware of her unusual status in this community, a Western woman in a forbidden land. She occasionally heard hushed discussions among monks about whether her presence might draw unwelcome attention from Tibetan officials. For her part, she tried to remain inconspicuous, often wearing Tibetan attire and adopting local customs. Still, She knew that if word spread too far, she could be forcibly expelled or even punished. Yet the sense of acceptance she felt among many of the monks buoyed her spirits. She had proven her willingness to adhere to their schedule, respect their rules, and engage with humility. She believed that if she continued to show sincerity, they would guard her secret. The deeper she delved into esoteric practice, the more she glimpsed the interplay of mind and reality. The line between what was outwardly real and what was mentally constructed seemed to blur. She learned that while the advanced yogic feats described in texts, levitation, telepathy, even immortality, were theoretically possible, they were byproducts of deep spiritual transformation, not ends in themselves. During a particularly fierce snowstorm, she took shelter in the monastery's main hall with the other monks. They chanted for hours, their voices weaving an otherworldly melody. Alexandra found herself lost in the resonance, swaying gently with each syllable. She had read about how certain chanting patterns could induce trance-like states, but now, experiencing it firsthand, she felt lifted beyond her usual mental chatter. She glimpsed a silence that was not empty but alive with potential. For an instant, she forgot her name, her identity, her ambition. Everything melted into the sound. When the chanting ended, she blinked, returning to herself. Tsering Dorje caught her eye and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that she had tasted a morsel of deeper awareness. She felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes, tears of gratitude and wonder. On another occasion, she joined Wang Du in a telepathy experiment. They sat facing each other in the dim interior of his hermitage. He explained that in Tibetan law, certain adepts could send messages mind to mind over great distances. In truth, he said, this is simply another aspect of the illusion practices. The mind, when concentrated, can project thoughts as vividly as shapes. He gave Alexandra a short phrase in Tibetan. Try to focus on these words and direct them to me without speaking. She closed her eyes, repeating the phrase in her mind. She tried to infuse it with clarity and intention, imagining it traveling on a beam of light toward Wang Du. After several moments, she opened her eyes. Wang Du gave a small smile. I received something about the lotus that blooms in snow, he said. Alexandra's heart leapt. It was, roughly, the phrase she had been given. Though the words were not a perfect match, they were close enough to suggest he had picked up at least an echo of her thoughts. Yongden later teased her. Perhaps you are discovering your hidden powers. She laughed. Or perhaps we simply guessed. But it does show that these practices might be real, or real enough to be worth further exploration. In the midst of all these occult lessons, Alexandra never lost sight of the more grounded aspects of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. She studied the concept of emptiness, shunyata, the path of compassion, bodhicitta, and the multi-layered symbolism behind the tantras. She saw how easily the pursuit of magic could become a distraction if one failed to anchor it in the broader framework of awakening. It was a lesson hammered home by Tsering Dorje and Wang Du alike. Technique is empty without wisdom. A turning point arrived when Alexandra successfully demonstrated a rudimentary tulpa to Wang Du. It happened late one afternoon. She had been practicing for weeks, shaping a small figure, an ethereal monk who stood at attention, hands folded in prayer. Under Wang Du's instructions, she visualized the figure in extraordinary detail. This time, when she opened her eyes, she perceived a faint outline that persisted for several seconds before dissolving. Wang Du inhaled sharply. Remarkable, he said. Your concentration has grown stronger, but be wary. A half-formed tulpa can be unstable. You must maintain mental control at all times. Alexandra nodded, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. She felt a sense of triumph mixed with a certain eeriness. Even if the form was mostly in her mind, its apparent stability for those few seconds startled her. That night, she hardly slept. She kept replaying the vision in her head, pondering the boundary between inner and outer reality. Was she verging on madness or stepping into a deeper truth about the creative power of consciousness? She remembered a line she had once read. Mind is the builder. Mind is the destroyer. It now seemed more than a pithy aphorism. It felt like a revelation. The next morning she confided in Yongden. I worry that I might lose myself in these practices. What if I can't tell the difference between my illusions and the real world? Yongden gave her a reassuring smile. That's why the teachers emphasize compassion and emptiness. If you hold on to the notion that all phenomena are empty, even your illusions, you remain free. And you must remain humble. If your heart is in the right place, you won't be led astray. She breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, Yongden. I don't know what I'd do without you. He grinned. Probably freeze on a mountainside somewhere. In truth, their partnership had grown into a bond of mutual respect and camaraderie. While she was older and more experienced in the world, he offered insights into Tibetan culture, subtle nuances of language, and a steady presence that balanced her fervor. Yet, amidst the swirl of esoteric practices and daily monastic life, Alexandra never forgot her ultimate dream, to reach Lhasa. Some of the older monks shook their heads, cautioning that the capital city was heavily guarded against foreigners. But a young monk confided that many pilgrims moved in and out of Lhasa, and if Alexandra perfected her disguise and travelled with a small group, it might be feasible. Quietly, she began gathering items for the eventual journey, extra clothing, a better set of Tibetan boots, and anything else that might help her blend in. She strategized with Yongden about possible routes. They would need to avoid official checkpoints, possibly taking circuitous paths through high passes. They would also require the support of local pilgrims or sympathetic monks who could provide cover stories. All of this planning was overshadowed by a deeper realization. She was now, in many ways, a participant in the very spiritual tradition she had come to study. She was not merely an observer collecting tales of Tibetan magic and mystery. She was living it, practicing it, forging her own path. That transformation filled her with both exhilaration and humility. She sensed that if ever she did set down her accounts in writing, they would be infused not just with scholarly detail, but with the beating heart of lived experience. And so, at the conclusion of one more tummo session, as she sat in the hermitage with sweat trickling down her brow despite the freezing temperature outside, she whispered to herself, "This land has changed me forever. May I carry its wisdom with reverence and share it for the benefit of all." Little did she know how many more challenges awaited her, both from the rugged landscapes of Tibet and from the intangible realms of the mind. She had tasted the power behind illusions, glimpsed the potential of telepathy, and harnessed the inner heat that defied the Himalayan cold. Each practice was a stepping stone toward a deeper understanding of the Buddhist path, or a potential pitfall if misused. The next phase of her journey would unfold in realms both worldly and unworldly, testing her commitment to the teachings and her audacity in the face of mortal danger. Lhasa beckoned like a dream on the horizon, shimmering with mystery and promise. But to reach that shining city, she would have to walk a knife's edge between devotion and daring, a path only a few had ever traveled, and even fewer had lived to recount. Episode 4. Into the Forbidden Realm. Spring melted the edges of snow, and the narrow passes that led deeper into Tibet gradually opened. The once icy trails became muddy quagmires, but at least they were passable. Alexandra, Yongden, and a small band of pilgrims packed their belongings and prepared to depart from Tsering Dorje's monastery. The Lama himself was composed, but Alexandra could sense the underlying concern in his eyes as he offered them final blessings. "Though you have practiced among us, the road to Lhasa is fraught with perils," he said gently. "Officials are on the lookout for foreign travelers. If you are discovered, there could be dire consequences. Remain vigilant. Do not reveal more than necessary." She bowed low. "We will. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you have taught me. I will never forget." Yongden echoed her sentiments, and Tsering Dorje placed a kata, an offering scarf, around each of their necks. He gave Alexandra a small package of dried medicinal herbs, explaining that they could help combat altitude sickness and infections. Then he gave Yongden a small amulet, said to invoke the protection of certain guardian deities. They set off early, the first light of dawn illuminating the rugged slopes. Alexandra wore the patched, dusty robe of a Tibetan pilgrim, her face subtly darkened by soot to blend in with the locals. She had perfected a modest gait, often lowering her eyes and muttering prayers in Tibetan. At her side, Yongden carried most of their supplies in a woven bag. The pilgrims they traveled with had been sworn to secrecy about her true identity. They believed she was simply a devout woman from a distant province who wished to see the holy city. For many days they trudged through high valleys and narrow gorges, stopping at small villages or nomad camps to rest and gather supplies. Yak caravans rumbled along these ancient trade routes, transporting salt, wool, and barley. The local people were friendly but curious. Alexandra offered little more than a polite greeting, repeating the same stories she had rehearsed about her home region. Along the way, she kept up her daily practice of tummo, often waking before the others to perform breath exercises. In the privacy of a tent or a secluded nook, she would stoke her inner fire, recalling Tsering Dorje's instructions. Sometimes she felt the burn of altitude sickness creeping in, her head pounding, her appetite dwindling. The tummo practice seemed to alleviate some of the worst symptoms, restoring her energy and focus. One evening, they reached a large river. A simple bridge, a few planks tied together, spanned the rushing water. Alexandra's heart pounded as she crossed, feeling the boards shift under her feet. Glancing down, she saw the torrent swirling, cold and relentless. She paused, steadying her breath with the tummo technique. She felt a wave of warmth course through her, giving her the courage to take the next step. Their pilgrimage group encountered a few Tibetan officials on horseback along the way. Each time, they feigned the typical deference of impoverished pilgrims, bowing low and explaining they were headed to Lhasa to pray at the Jokang Temple, the spiritual heart of Tibetan Buddhism. The officials barely spared them a second glance, more concerned with bandits or more obvious foreigners. Alexandra's disguise seemed to be working. Still, every encounter left her heart pounding. She knew if a suspicious officer demanded to see her face or hear her accent in more extended conversation, her cover might unravel. One slip, one sign of her European origins, and the entire expedition could end in arrest or worse. One afternoon, they stopped at a remote monastery for rest. The abbot, a serene old man with a beaming smile, welcomed them. Over salted butter tea, he asked about their journey. Alexandra kept quiet, letting Yongden do the talking. She noticed the abbot's curious gaze upon her, but he said nothing to indicate suspicion. Later that night, as she prepared to sleep, the abbot approached quietly. "Pilgrim," he said softly in Tibetan, "may I speak with you?" Her heart fluttered. Bowing, she answered, "Of course, venerable abbot." He invited her into a small side chapel. The flickering glow of a butter lamp cast shadows on ancient murals depicting the life of the Buddha. The abbot studied her face, and Alexandra fought the urge to lower her gaze. "I sense you are not as you appear," the abbot said kindly. "Yet your devotion is real. Do not fear. Your secret is safe with me. But I must caution you. The route to Lhasa is more dangerous now than ever. Word travels that a foreign woman roams these parts. Soldiers search for her." Her blood ran cold. "Surely they must be mistaken," she managed, in her best Tibetan accent. He nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips. "May it be so. But keep your wits about you. I sense a strong determination in you, and a strong blessing. Go in peace, child." Alexandra bowed with as much gratitude and humility as she could muster. That night, she barely slept, the abbot's warning echoing in her mind. The net was tightening. Somehow, rumors had spread that a foreign woman was in Tibet, and local officials were on alert. She realized she would need every scrap of cunning, disguise, and spiritual resilience to evade capture. In the following days, they changed their route, avoiding major checkpoints by taking smaller, more treacherous paths. Nights were spent in tiny hamlets or in nomad tents, the wind howling across the plains. The dryness of the air and the high altitude took a toll on Alexandra's lungs, leaving her breathless after even moderate exertion. Yet she pressed on. They often rose before dawn to continue traveling. The pre-dawn glow revealed a stark, lunar landscape, rolling hills of sparse grassland, craggy mountains in the distance, and an endless sky that shifted from black to cobalt to pink. With each step, Alexandra felt a surreal mix of awe and fatigue. She reminded herself constantly of why she was doing this, to witness firsthand the heart of Tibet, to deepen her understanding of its spiritual heritage, and to fulfill the longing that had beckoned her since she first opened a Tibetan text so many years ago. At last, they crossed a pass that opened onto a wide plateau. The lead pilgrim, an elderly man who had journeyed to Lhasa many times, pointed to the horizon. "Not far now," he whispered in a reverent tone. "Within a few days, we should see the city." Alexandra's pulse quickened. Lhasa, the fabled city of the Dalai Lama, the Potala Palace rising like a fortress above the valley, the Yokang Temple thronged by pilgrims who circled it day and night. She had read accounts from a handful of foreigners who had dared to enter, but none of them had been a woman traveling under such secrecy. As they neared the outskirts of Lhasa, they encountered more pilgrims, mendicants, and traders. Some carried prayer wheels, chanting mantras under their breath. Others wore wide-brimmed hats to shield themselves from the relentless sun. A hush of expectation seemed to settle over everyone. The city was close. Yet so were the watchful eyes of the authorities. The group had to carefully time their approach, blending in with other arrivals. Alexandra and Yongden planned to slip into the city under the cover of dusk, staying among the throngs of pilgrims who sought lodging in the crowded quarters near the Jokang. Their chance came late one afternoon. Grey clouds loomed overhead, threatening a storm. The city gates were busy with travelers rushing to find shelter before rain or snow came. Alexandra, face lowered, shuffled along behind an older pilgrim couple, reciting Om Mani Padme Hum under her breath. In the hubbub, the guards barely glanced at her. She was just another thread in the tapestry of humanity flocking to the holy city. Once inside, she dared to lift her eyes briefly. Lhasa's narrow streets stretched before her, lined with whitewashed buildings adorned with colorful window frames. At the far end, she glimpsed the imposing silhouette of the Potala Palace, a vast structure perched high on a hill, commanding the entire valley. A jolt of awe passed through her. She had made it, crossing all those miles and all those dangers. But this was only the beginning. She quickly joined Yongden, and they found refuge in a cramped guest house frequented by pilgrims. The smell of yak butter and incense permeated the air, mixing with the pungent odors of unwashed bodies and damp straw. They squeezed into a tiny room with several others, lying side by side on rough mats. Exhausted but exhilarated, Alexandra let her eyes flutter shut, praying silently for continued guidance. Over the next days, she moved about the city with caution. The narrow alleys of Barkor, the circuit around the Jokang Temple, bustled with pilgrims performing kora, circumambulation. Alexandra joined them, her prayer wheel spinning in her hand. She blended in as best she could, adopting the stride and postures she had studied among Tibetans. Once in a while, she stopped at a market stall to buy dried yak cheese or a small religious trinket, exchanging hushed words in Tibetan. Her heart pounded at every corner, worried that a soldier or official might stop her. But she remained unseen in plain sight. She discovered that the great temple was as splendid and sacred as she had imagined. Stepping inside, she smelled the thick fragrance of butter lamps, heard the murmured prayers of countless devotees, and saw the glint of gilded statues representing various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. One evening, she even dared to approach the base of the Potala Palace. There, steps led up and up in a majestic sweep. She gazed at the palace walls, painted a deep red and stark white, rising against the darkening sky. A sense of reverence overwhelmed her. This was the seat of the Dalai Lama, the spiritual and temporal leader of Tibet, a domain so often closed to outsiders. Tears welled in her eyes as she remembered how many had told her it was impossible. And yet here she stood. For a fleeting moment, she felt a cosmic hush descend upon her, as though the city's ancient stones recognized her presence, an improbable visitor who had come in search of truth. Yet there was no time for complacency. Word spread among the pilgrims that officials were conducting random checks, searching for foreigners or spies. The pilgrim guest houses buzzed with rumors of arrests. Alexandra and Yongden dared not stay too long in one spot. They moved from lodging to lodging, sometimes sleeping in the outermost neighborhoods or even in local homes that offered them shelter for a night. In those precarious times, Alexandra recalled her secret initiations, her training in tummo, illusions, and telepathy. Could they help her now? She practiced tummo diligently each evening, generating the warmth and clarity she needed to combat her growing anxiety. She also meditated on emptiness, reminding herself that all phenomena, including fear, were transitory and without inherent substance. Once, she tried a small experiment. While traversing a particularly guarded street, she attempted to visualize herself as utterly invisible, an illusion that might lead prying eyes to slide right past her. She focused on her breath, conjuring an image of empty space where she walked. Whether by coincidence or by subtle mental power, the soldiers manning the street corner looked away as she passed. She felt a rush of adrenaline, though she dared not linger to test the illusion further. In the cramped quarters of a dimly lit tea house, she confided to Yongden, "We cannot remain here indefinitely. Eventually, someone will discover our presence." He nodded, sipping from a bowl of steaming butter tea. "Perhaps we should stay just long enough for you to see what you came to see, learn what you hope to learn, and then find a way out." Her eyes scanned the other patrons. "And how shall we do that?" "The same way we came in. Quietly. By the back roads." "Likely. Unless you wish to leave by a more official route, which would be unwise." She gave a dry laugh. "Unwise is putting it mildly." Still, she remained in Lhasa for several weeks, soaking in the atmosphere of devotion. She quietly observed ceremonial dances, listened to debates among monks from various monasteries, and even managed to obtain a few texts on tantric practice from a local bookseller who, thankfully, did not question her identity too closely. Each day she took careful notes in her journal, describing the city's layout, the architecture of the sacred sites, and the daily flow of life. One evening, she found herself near the Jokang again, watching pilgrims perform full-body prostrations along the Barkor circuit. She was moved by their fervent faith, their dogged determination to earn merit. In a brief moment of introspection, she realized her own determination, though shaped by intellectual curiosity, was not so different at heart. She too had crossed vast distances and endured hardships for something she believed in, something that called to her soul. But the net was indeed tightening. One late afternoon, as she stepped out from a narrow alley, she saw a group of Tibetan soldiers interrogating travelers. Her pulse spiked. Quickly, she ducked behind a stall selling dried herbs, waiting for them to pass. She overheard fragments of their conversation. "The foreign woman. Reward for information." Her breath caught. She stayed hidden until the soldiers left, then slipped back to the guest house. That night, she and Yongden decided the time had come to leave Lhasa. She had accomplished her dream of witnessing this sacred city. Staying longer risked capture, which could jeopardize not only her life, but also the safety of those who had helped her. They packed their meager belongings, said hushed goodbyes to a few trusted pilgrims, and set out under the cloak of night. The gates were not heavily guarded at that hour, but they still had to avoid a few watchful sentries. They joined a group of traveling monks who were departing for a nearby monastery outside the city. The ruse worked. They slipped out with the departing pilgrims and melted into the countryside. As they retraced their steps along the high passes and remote trails, Alexandra felt a mix of relief and longing. She had seen Lhasa, touched its stones, breathed its rarefied air, but her thirst for knowledge was far from sated. What she had gained, though, was a sense of validation, a kind of spiritual fortification. She had walked the corridors of the Forbidden City and lived to tell the tale. En route, they heard more stories of arrests and crackdowns. Some whispered that foreigners had been seized and escorted to the borders under armed guard. Others said a spy ring was uncovered, intensifying government paranoia. Alexandra realized that her successful passage was partly luck, partly the skillful illusions of her disguise, and partly the spiritual aid she felt she had received from Tsering Dorje and Wangdu. In her journal, she wrote, "I have now stood in the heart of forbidden Tibet, in the presence of its living traditions. I have experienced the profound devotion of its pilgrims, the towering majesty of its palaces and temples, and the intangible power of its esoteric arts. Though forced to leave, I carry within me a flame that will never be extinguished. May the world one day see beyond its fear and recognize the treasures hidden in this land." When they finally returned to a safer region near the border, Alexandra took time to rest and reflect. She practiced Tummo under less dire circumstances, consolidating her understanding of the technique. She discovered she could generate warmth more swiftly, regulate her internal temperature with surprising ease. It seemed her experiences in Lhasa and the constant tension she had endured had sharpened her focus. She also revisited her illusions training, this time from a place of relative calm. With Yongden's help, she attempted to manifest a small tulpa again, visualizing it in a controlled environment. She managed to maintain its presence for a few heartbeats longer than before, feeling both exhilarated and unsettled by the result. She remembered Wang Du's caution. Illusions can ensnare the practitioner if not handled with clear awareness. All the while, she remained keenly aware of the historical moment she was living through. Tibet was suspicious of outside influence for good reason. Powerful neighbors like China and foreign powers like Britain had long eyed its strategic position. Her infiltration of Lhasa was not merely a personal triumph, but a reflection of a changing world order. She knew that once she returned to the West, her accounts might stir controversy or ignite a deeper interest in Tibetan culture. Eventually, she penned a letter to Tsering Dorje, entrusting it to a traveling monk who promised to deliver it. In it, she expressed her boundless gratitude. "Venerable Lama, I have gone where I once believed impossible. I have practiced the teachings you so patiently imparted, and I have come to see more clearly the tapestry of mind and reality. Please accept my humble thanks. Your guidance has been a lamp in the darkness." She ended the letter with a prayer that the Dharma flourish, that the knowledge she had gained be used for the benefit of all beings. In her heart, she hoped that the seeds planted in her might blossom into works that would illuminate the richness of Tibetan spirituality for a wider world. Yet her journey was not yet done. She still had to find a way back across borders, through lands ravaged by war and suspicion, to return to Europe. In the meantime, a new horizon opened. How would she share her story without betraying the trust of her Tibetan teachers? How would she reveal the secrets of magic and mystery in Tibet without trivializing them? As she and Yongden rested in a humble lodging, preparing for the next leg of the trek toward India, she whispered to him, "I feel both elation and heaviness. I have seen wonders, but the burden of truth weighs on me. How can I do justice to what we have experienced?" Yongden smiled softly. "We can only speak from our hearts, with honesty and respect." And so, in that quiet moment, Alexandra resolved to someday write a comprehensive account of her travels and the secret initiations she had undergone. She would frame them in a context that honored Tibetan Buddhism's depth and complexity rather than sensationalizing or belittling it. For the knowledge she had gained was not a parlor trick. It was a window into the vast potential of the human spirit, a reflection of the universal quest for enlightenment. Little did she know that this resolution would turn into one of the most influential books of its kind, captivating the imaginations of countless readers. But for now, her sights were set on the path home, a path that would be long, arduous, and haunted by the memories of the forbidden city she had left behind. Episode 5. The Return and the Reckoning. The monsoon rains battered the foothills of the Himalayas, turning dirt paths into mire. Alexandra David-Neel and Yongden stumbled along precarious slopes, their boots caked with mud. Tents had to be pitched in soggy clearings where the night air swirled with mosquitoes and the roar of swollen rivers thundered nearby. This was the final stretch, descending from the Tibetan highlands into the northern regions of India. Despite the discomfort, Alexandra felt a swelling sense of accomplishment. She had seen Lhasa, touched the heart of Tibet's mystical traditions, and survived to tell the tale. But as they navigated these treacherous routes, she also felt a surge of longing to share what she had learned. She wanted to put pen to paper, to unravel the tapestry of experiences that had shaped her into someone far different from the woman who had left Europe years ago. When at last they reached a bustling Indian town, the difference was jarring. Markets overflowed with spices and textiles, the chatter of traders filling the humid air. Rickshaws jostled for space with bullock carts. It felt like another world compared to the silent expanses of Tibet. Alexandra sat at a modest inn, sipping hot chai, her mind adrift in recollections of snow-capped peaks and chanting monks. She found a moment to write a few letters to friends in Europe, hinting at her remarkable journey, but leaving out the details that might incriminate her or her Tibetan hosts. Mail services were erratic, but at least she could send a message that she was alive. Days turned to weeks as she and Yongden worked their way toward Calcutta, where she hoped to catch a ship bound for Europe. Along the way, she encountered scholars, British officials, and fellow travelers who heard snippets of her story. Some were incredulous. "You went into Tibet?" they asked, eyes wide. "That's impossible. Foreigners aren't allowed." Alexandra would smile enigmatically. "Where there's a will, there's a way." She never revealed too much, only enough to satisfy casual curiosity. The fullness of her tale she saved for her future writings. Eventually, they arrived in Calcutta's teeming port. Smoke belched from steamships lined along the docks. Indian dockworkers hustled under the watchful eyes of British portmasters. Alexandra felt a pang of culture shock at the barrage of modern commerce, the swirl of global trade. With some difficulty, she managed to secure passage on a ship that would take her closer to Europe. She and Yongden settled into a small cabin, battered trunks containing all they had left, precious Tibetan texts, ritual items, and Alexandra's carefully guarded journals. The ship's horn blared, echoing across the wide expanse of water. As the vessel pulled away from the Indian shore, Alexandra stood on deck, the wind whipping her hair. She wondered when or if she would ever see Tibet again. During the voyage, she began sorting through her journals, organizing the notes she had scribbled during those midnight vigils at monasteries or in the cramped glow of butter lamps. Page after page, detailed encounters with lamas, secret initiations, tummo training, illusions, and the fleeting glimpses of tulpas. She marveled at the scope of it all. How could she possibly convey these revelations in a coherent narrative? Yet she felt a driving need to do so, not out of vanity, but because she sensed that her experiences, grounded in real practice and real hardship, could bridge the gap between East and West. She believed that Tibet's esoteric traditions deserved earnest study, not dismissal as superstition. She also felt obliged to honor the generosity of the Tibetan teachers who had shared their time and knowledge with her, provided she concealed their identities carefully to protect them from political repercussions. Upon reaching Europe, she found a continent still reeling from the aftershocks of war. The year was no longer 1916, of course. It was later, and the world had changed. Reconstruction was underway, economies were recovering, and there was a spark of optimism mixed with the lingering grief. She resumed her life in a modest apartment, reacclimatizing to modern conveniences like electric lights and running water. The hustle of Western city life felt alien after so long in the quiet realms of Tibet. No sooner had she unpacked her bags than she threw herself into writing. Her desk became a fortress of notes, reference texts, and half-finished manuscripts. She worked tirelessly, drafting chapters that described her entry into Tibet, the clandestine journeys, the hardships, the wonders of Lhasa, and especially the secret yogic practices she had studied. She recounted the dedication of Tsering Dorje, the humor of Wang Du, and the steadfast loyalty of Yongden. Every page was a balancing act. How much to reveal about the esoteric initiations without violating the vow of secrecy she had taken? She resolved to describe the practices in broad strokes, emphasizing the spiritual context rather than the minute ritual details that the lamas had asked her to keep private. She believed that the essence of tummo, illusions, and telepathy would be best conveyed by illustrating the mental discipline and moral responsibility they required rather than outlining every technique. In letters to colleagues, she debated what to call her future work. Magic and mystery in Tibet had a certain ring, evocative but hopefully not sensational. She wanted her book to intrigue readers without cheapening the profound truths she had encountered. Over time, she refined her manuscript, weaving in historical context the role of the Dalai Lama, Tibet's unique form of Buddhism, and the precarious political situation that made it a forbidden kingdom. Financial challenges plagued her. Publishers were intrigued by her story, but questioned the authenticity. Was it truly possible that a woman, a foreigner, had not only traveled to Lhasa, but studied secret practices? Some editors doubted, others demanded sensational additions. She stood firm, insisting on factual accuracy. Whenever possible, she cited references to known events or minor cross-checks. But much of what she had lived remained undocumented except through her own eyes. Throughout this period, Yongden remained her loyal companion. She formally adopted him, in a sense, and he acclimated to life in Europe as best he could, though he often longed for the open skies of Tibet. He helped her refine the Tibetan vocabulary in the manuscript, ensuring the transliterations were as accurate as possible. When she faltered with self-doubt, wondering if Western audiences would label her stories as mere fantasy, he reassured her. "They will see your sincerity," he said quietly, "and they will sense the truth behind your words." At last, after countless revisions, she completed the manuscript that would become Magic and Mystery in Tibet. When it was finally published, it caused a stir among intellectual circles and the general public. Reviewers oscillated between fascination and skepticism. Some questioned whether such feats as tummo or telepathy were real, while others lauded her bravery in exploring a land so few Westerners had seen. Public lectures followed. She found herself in lecture halls, addressing curious audiences about the true nature of Tibetan Buddhism. With a measured tone, she spoke of how these practices were not magic in the cheap sense, but rather profound demonstrations of the mind's capacity when disciplined through meditation, visualization, and unwavering devotion. She described the moral imperative behind them, how knowledge divorced from compassion could become a path of destruction. She remembered the conversations with Tsering Dorje about illusions. "We can shape illusions," she would tell the crowds. "But the greatest illusion is believing our ordinary reality is fixed and immutable." Tibetan adepts show us that the mind is a vast creative force, but they also remind us that wisdom and compassion must guide that force. People came to her with questions about Lhasa, about the Dalai Lama, about what it was like to pass as a pilgrim. She answered as best she could without betraying confidences, regaling them with glimpses of the Patala's grandeur, the solemn chanting in the Jokang, and the sprawling monasteries perched in remote highlands. She spoke of how she had disguised herself, faced the biting cold, and risked capture at every turn. Some listeners doubted her, others were spellbound. Over time, however, her credibility was bolstered by the consistency of her accounts, the depth of her knowledge of Tibetan language and customs, and the verifiable aspects of her journey. She was no passing traveler. She was a scholar, a Buddhist practitioner, and a woman who had gone to extraordinary lengths to learn from Tibetan teachers on their own terms. Her renown grew, and she continued to write, producing more works that delved into Buddhist philosophy, the interplay of East and West, and the universal search for spiritual meaning. She navigated controversies, warding off critics who accused her of exposing secret teachings. She maintained that she only disclosed what was necessary to enrich understanding, never revealing the innermost rituals or the names of teachers who had asked for anonymity. Back in Tibet, the political situation grew more tense with each passing year, culminating in even greater upheavals later in the century. Alexandra worried constantly about those who had sheltered her. She sent messages through travelers and monks whenever she could, hoping Tsering Dorje, Wang Du, and the others were safe. Occasionally, a letter would reach her, affirming that they were well, that her texts were read with interest among those who were open-minded about foreign interpretations. As the years rolled on, Alexandra became a prominent figure in the circles of exploration, anthropology, and religious studies. But she never lost her humility. She recalled how she had nearly frozen in the hermitage, trembling in the presence of Tsering Dorje's unwavering calm. She remembered the harrowing nights in Lhasa, heart-pounding as she evaded patrols. She knew that her triumphs were built on the goodwill and teaching of countless Tibetans who had helped her cross the chasms of language and culture. In her later reflections, she wrote, "I ventured to Tibet seeking its esoteric wonders, but I found so much more, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for faith, endurance, and profound insight. In the shimmering illusions of the mind, I discovered a deeper reality, that all phenomena arise from causes and conditions, and in their emptiness we find infinite possibility. May these lessons guide us toward compassion, wisdom, and the recognition that all beings share in the vast mystery of existence." And so her legacy was cemented. Over time, readers across the world devoured magic and mystery in Tibet, hungry for tales of the exotic, the hidden, the mystic. Yet beneath the surface drama of clandestine travels lay a deeper core, the Buddhist message of compassion and impermanence, the meditative achievements that pointed to the untapped reservoirs within each of us. In the final autumn of her long life, Alexandra sat in a small study, letters scattered across a desk. She read a note from a student she had never met. "Your writings have opened my eyes to the possibilities of the mind. Thank you for shining a light on a world once deemed impenetrable." She smiled, recalling how decades earlier she had stood on the deck of a steamship, leaving a war-torn Europe behind, driven by a dream to penetrate the secrets of the Forbidden Kingdom. She thought of the day she first met Tsering Dorje, of the warmth of Tummo on an icy Himalayan night, of the ephemeral tulpa that flickered at the edge of her vision. Indeed, the illusions had become real, and the real had revealed itself as fleeting. Yet through it all, she had held a steady course, guided by curiosity and reverence. Such was her story, extraordinary, improbable, yet profoundly human. In the end, the secrets she pursued were not solely in hidden monasteries or arcane rituals, but in the boundless realm of consciousness itself. Her life bore testament to the idea that barriers, whether geographical, cultural, or mental, could be transcended through unwavering resolve and respect for the wisdom found in every corner of the earth. If one listened carefully, perhaps in the hush of early morning, they might still hear the echo of her footsteps crunching across frozen passes, the soft murmur of her prayers at the yokang, the whispered hush of illusions forming in the silent air. And in that echo, a reminder. The unknown remains vast, and the human spirit's capacity to explore it is vaster still. O1 Pro